This video is about a hidden narrative in a Renaissance St. George and the Dragon painting. The narrative describes expressively the deeper relationship between man and woman or male and female. The story of St. George and the Dragon has pre-Christian origins and is recorded in the lives of various saints before being attributed to St. George alone. But in this video, we are going to talk about a particular Renaissance painting on the subject of this Christian saint. What distinguishes this painting from many others is that it contains symbolism that tells a very different story from the one handed down to us by our ancestors. I must mention that this interpretation has no scientific basis and is based solely on my own spiritual experience and contemplation of this painting by Paolo Uccello. The painting shows all the usual participants in the traditional narrative. In addition, we can recognize the symbol of an eye, formed by the clouds, illustrating the power of God. If you follow the course of the line from the eye of God into the scene, you can see that it reaches through St. George's lance into the dragon's head. If you extend the line towards the ground, it ends at the feet of the lady. Another unusual aspect is the leash in the lady's hand, which suggests that she has tamed the dragon so that it is willing to submit to George and his weapon. Furthermore, the scene can easily be interpreted to mean that the dragon is only wounded and not killed. My core interpretation of this painting is far less obvious than those already mentioned. I see a clear sexual and deeply spiritual connotation in the scene. You need to bear in mind that in the old days people didn't separate the physical and spiritual worlds. So the scene might show aspects of our souls rather than an ancient saga in which dragons existed. What does the dragon represent in relation to the human soul? Well, in older stories about this topic, the dragon was often described as a snake or painted as a winged serpent. Serpents leads us to references in the Bible, of which the most prominent is from the book of Genesis. And then there's the snake tempted Eve into eating the forbidden fruit. After they'd eaten it, they could conjure negative and destructive concepts such as shame and evil. Okay, at this point, I should give you some context about how I interpret certain items. We need to consider certain things if we look at a painting or a story with a spiritual lens. First, if someone respected is riding on a donkey or a horse, this means that this person has integrated his lower or animal nature into his own being and is using this power to serve his life. In the Sufi philosophies, this lower nature of man is described as the nafs, which they consider to be the lowest dimension of man's inner existence, his animal and material nature. In this respect, it is not possible to kill one's nafs or animal nature without committing suicide, so it is about making friends with it and not letting it dominate you. The Sufi way of doing this is to find a Sufi master who can guide you through this process, but I consider this no longer suitable for the 21st century. The Creator has given mankind all the necessary tools, and we have developed our minds to such an extent that only something direct and tangible can guide us through such a process. But finding access to such means has become extremely difficult for modern man. It requires letting go of everything, no prejudices, no hopes, no thinking. Usually, it can happen in certain states of shock or when people start to feel that they are looking for something outside their comfort zone and are lucky to find someone who can help them access their inner hidden world. Let's go back to the painting now and use the mentioned context to interpret the scene. If the dragon represents the lower dimension of man's inner existence, then the lady and the knight would represent the higher aspects of our souls, right? If we look closely at their faces, we see that they are young and beautiful and not at all affected by the dramatic scene in which they find themselves. Their noble clothing also points to medieval patterns of nobility and knighthood as aspects of the soul, not just wealth and physical strength. As for the connection between the dragon and the lady, and the horse and the knight, you might think that it is unfair that the knight has a beautiful horse and the lady an ugly dragon. But if we look more closely at the dragon's wings, we see emblems or crests at the upper and lower sides. In the Middle Ages, crests were usually noble family crests, and it seems that the crests on the top and the bottom are of different colors. So it could be that two families are involved in the creation of the dragon. So the dragon is a manifestation of the families of the lady and the knight. Alone, the presence of these emblems is very unusual in paintings of dragons, and doesn't mean that the dragon did join the Royal Air Force. Okay, let's dive into a rather controversial aspect about the act of human procreation. The man and the woman are forming a kind of channel for different types of subtle energies that will create the soul of a potential human being. The consciousness of the parents during the act determines what kind of energies are being channeled into being. In the painting, I would argue that everything is in perfect order. The lower parts of energies are tamed and blinded by the woman and the man. Their higher self is focused and not attached to anything but God's power. A Renaissance painting like this only shows the heroic climax at the end of an epic story about a young man's search for the heart of a young lady or princess. Such stories can be found in the Parsifal Saga, in some fairy tales by the brothers Grimm, or in Mozart's Magic Flute. If we were to rewind the scene in Uccello's painting, it would look something like this. The lady and the knight are still children, and the dragon is a harmless baby dragon. However, since we are talking about aspects of the soul here, this means that the souls of these children have not yet passed through the various stages of growing up, just like their bodies, hearts, and minds. But for a child's soul to grow along with its body and mind would only happen in an ideal world. In our world, this happens very rarely, and these children are sometimes regarded to become prophets or saints. So in our painting, the two children grow into a kind of man and woman who are sometimes described as perfect humans. They are aware of the human part of their souls and are ready to face the subhuman aspects of their souls when they finally become a couple. But what about the dragon? Of course, he gets grown up too. However, these lower aspects of our soul are a potential danger to other people or to society itself. Therefore, over the centuries, all forms of organized societies have developed measures to limit the harmful effects of these energies. As such, our taboos, social norms, with the help of religions or law enforcement. In terms of the spiritual aspects of this measure, the dragons should no longer act freely and be somehow locked in. Of course, it is necessary to use such measures, but they are rather a mitigation than a solution, because it is in no way possible to separate the lower aspects of our being from ourselves. We, or rather our ancestors, have created them, and it is our very obligation to integrate them into our souls, so that future generations will be less influenced and hurt by those harmful entities. Back to what might happen before the heroic end of the story. It can be summarized as a man's search for a lady's heart or for the Holy Grail. But if we remember the old tales, these quests are often battles and fights, and many participants pay for them with their lives. And those battles are not limited to gaining the heart of a lady, nor they are a thing of the past. If we were able to trace the many conflicts in today's societies, we would see that we are indeed unconsciously driven by such forces, which could be linked to a wild animal in us. These conflicts are either seen as political, social, psychological, or legal problems, but no one wants to see the deeper cause. And even if, on very rare occasions, there is a happy ending, like in this painting, just some awareness in today's societies of what's going on would make a big difference. Of course, there is much more to be said on this subject, but I think I have already delved quite deeply into this world of symbolism in a spiritual context in a publicly available video. You may wonder if these stories and symbols are still relevant in our current world of increasing disorder. Well, that is a question that everyone must answer for themselves. If you want to delve deeper into these worlds, other videos on the channel are getting you closer to many described aspects of the painting.